really good this morning. I want to especially thank the men for singing bass and the women over here that's singing alto. Everybody sounded good, and also the soprano. Blended together very well this morning. Here we are. We're here at Park Place, out in the dining area. We still can't go and meet in the chapel because of the pandemic. The numbers continue to get worse, but so far as we're concerned, as long as we're here and safe and following all the rules, we're safe from this disease, and let's just keep it that way. We're a little closer toward getting a vaccine, maybe even by the end of next month. There may be some vaccines available, and we would like to be looking forward to that so that we may have that and feel a lot safer about the things as we go through our daily life. And maybe with the vaccines, we can return things a little more to normal. Hopefully after we get the vaccine, we'll be able to, in a few months, be able to meet back in the chapel and be a little more comfortable than we are in here, although this works just fine. We can get all spread out in here and socially distanced, and that works well. You know, last week we talked about Thanksgiving and how blessed we are, and we're still so truly blessed. You know, we've talked about we're in the middle of this pandemic, and that's, of course, a problem and troublesome and something that we have to deal with and learn to cope with and work our way around. And we have political unrest in our country, and that's unfortunate. We all need to be praying for a smooth transition of government in January. So we've got a few things going on, but as we talked about last week, we're still the most blessed nation on earth, and we still hope God remains with us in the coming years. Today, though, before 2 weeks ago, we talked about Joseph. A couple of weeks we talked about Joseph. And today we're going to pick up the story after the death of Joseph. Now, the fellow we're going to talk about today is Moses. And Moses he's an important prophet in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so all the Abrahamic religions, because he was a descendant of Abraham and one of the children of Israel. And Moses also wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, which we know as the Pentateuch. So Moses is an important person, but most importantly, Moses was the lawgiver. Moses was the one that gave the children of Israel the law of Moses, as it's referred to appropriately. You'll recall the 10 Commandments. You recall Moses going up on Mount Sinai. All of those things are things that happened later in Moses' life that we're all familiar with. Today we're going to talk about the first 80 years of Moses' life. Now I want you to think about that, 80 years. Now that's kind of a long time. You know, several of us here are over 80 years old. Some of us are getting closer to 80 years old. But this is about the first 80 years of Moses' life. And I think it's a great story. As far as when it was in time, it was something over 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus. And we're told that it was 430 years after the children of Israel went from the land of Canaan to Egypt. You'll recall during the famine when Joseph was the one that saved the family. So we're going to read in Exodus 1. It says, "And Joseph died, all his brothers in that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and multiplied and increased abundantly and grew mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to the people, 'Look, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened in the event of war that they should join our enemies and fight against us and go up out of the land.'" So we've got a situation here where Joseph is now deceased. All of his family is gone. It's several hundred years later. And there's a king or a pharaoh in Egypt that didn't know Joseph. And he sees the children of Israel. If you'll recall, the Lord really blessed them in Egypt. And he gave them the best land in the land of Goshen. And they increased and multiplied exceedingly. Well, this pharaoh looks at this group of Hebrews and says, there's so many of them. If we end up go to war with someone, what if they become allies with our enemies? And they might run us out of our own country. They might take over. So he decided he had to do something about it. So he made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and he made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All the service which they made was with rigor. So he treated them very poorly, made their lives miserable. They had to make brick every day and do whatever the Egyptians wanted them to do. They were slaves. They had not been slaves at the time of Joseph, as you'll recall. They were the chosen people, and everyone in Egypt treated them well when the Pharaoh was there that Joseph knew. But this is years later and things change. You know, we've all seen that, how things over the course of time, somebody that's in favor may not be in favor any longer as times change and views change. So the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, put out an edict to all of the midwives. He said, what I want you to do is every time you have a Hebrew child born, if it's a boy, kill him. Now think about that. How harsh is that? Kill him. We want to kill all the Hebrew children that are males. We'll keep the females for slaves. But the midwives would not listen to the Pharaoh. They would not kill these children. So Pharaoh got really angry with them. And he said, what's the reason? What's the reason that you haven't killed these like we told you to? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Now think about that. They're saying that these Hebrews, they're different from the Egyptians. They have their babies before we can even get there. So there's really no purpose for the midwives. Well, this just made Pharaoh even madder. And it says, so Pharaoh then commanded his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So he still wants to kill all the boys of the Hebrew nation. And so what he's done now is he doesn't trust the midwives any longer. So he's saying, when these male children are born, you throw them in the river. Well, think about that. Can you imagine how hard it would be, the kind of person it would have to be to take a baby and throw it in the river? It's hard for us to imagine the evil of this Pharaoh. And of course, as we know, God is with the children of Israel. And he doesn't let this happen, even though the Pharaoh has ordered it. So then there's one story about one of the children that was born during this period of time that's the focus of our lesson today. And a man of the house of Levi named Amram went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi named Jochebed. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Now his sister's name was Miriam. So just get this picture in your mind. This mother, she's going to follow the Pharaoh's orders. She's going to put the baby in the river. But before she puts the baby in the river, she builds this basket made of bulrushes that the baby can float in. So here's this little baby, 3 months old. Think about that. Think about a little 3-month-old baby in the river, floating along while his sister Miriam's on the shore watching to see what happens. So here's what the story tells us next. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. And her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark with the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and the little baby wept. She had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Now mind you, this is the Pharaoh's daughter, the same Pharaoh that ordered the destruction of all the Hebrew male children. This is his daughter. Then his sister said to her, Miriam said, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women that they may nurse the child for you? Now think about that. How smart was that? She is there and she offers, she knows that the Pharaoh's daughter is going to love this little baby. I mean, who wouldn't love a little 3-month-old baby boy? And so she says, would you like for me to go get a nurse for you so that you can have someone to nurse this child? And then listen to this. Pharaoh's daughter said, go. So she went and called Jochebed, the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. What a strange story about how God works. Here this little baby is named Moses, which means drawn out. And Jochebed was smart enough to figure out this plan where she could save her child. She put him in this little ark in the river down by where the Pharaoh's daughter would go and bathe each day, figuring that she'd see this baby. Sure enough, she did. And Miriam's there. And Miriam, how smart she was, she said, I'll get a maid for you. I'll get someone to nurse this child for you. And it just so happened that it was Jochebed, the child's mother. So can you imagine the joy that Jochebed had when she had little baby Moses back in her arms and she was nursing him? And it says that not only did she get to take care of her baby, she was paid for it. She was given wages by the Pharaoh's daughter. And it said that she took the child and nursed him, and when the child grew, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Now, it reminds me a little bit of the story of Hannah. Do you remember the story of Hannah who prayed to have a child? And she finally had this child named Samuel. And she promised God that if he would give her a son or a child, that she would dedicate that child to the Lord. And she kept her promise, but remember, she took care of the baby Samuel until he was old enough to go live with Eli. And she gave up her son to serve the Lord. In this case, Jochebed gave up her son to avoid him being killed by the Egyptians. And of course, this was all a part of God's plan, as it always is. So the years went by. Moses grew up. He was a very, very fortunate young Hebrew. He had all the luxuries of the Pharaoh's house. He was the daughter to the Pharaoh. He was the son to the Pharaoh's daughter. In other words, he was like a grandson to the Pharaoh. And I'm sure this Pharaoh was like the rest of us that have grandsons or granddaughters. I'm sure that he loved this child, and he took him into his home, and he did all the things that needed to be done. So, baby Moses and then the child growing up Moses had all the wealth of the land at his disposal. But even through all this time, he knew his lineage. He knew that he was a Hebrew. He knew that he was a part of the children of Israel. I don't know if his mother taught him or his sister taught him, or we later learned he had a brother named Aaron somehow, but he knew this. And one day, he was out. This is when he's an adult now. He saw an Egyptian beating one of the slaves, one of the Hebrew slaves. And he got so angry that he went and fought back and actually killed the Egyptian. And then he hid his body. But he didn't think anybody saw him. So he thought, well, I've gotten away with this. But then the very next day, we're told that he saw two Hebrews fighting. And he went over and tried to break them up. And one of the Hebrews said to him, "Who made you prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me like you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" So Moses feared, because he knew then that they knew about what he had done. And he would just be a matter of time until word got to the Pharaoh. And no matter how much the Pharaoh loved him, he was still a Hebrew. And a Hebrew should not have been killing an Egyptian. So we're told that when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. Now, think about this. Here Moses is. He's got everything at his disposal. He is living a life of luxury and wealth until he takes this action and kills this Egyptian. And that changes everything. Reminds me of the story of Joseph that we talked about a few weeks ago. Joseph, remember how well he was doing? He was in charge of Potiphar's house. And then when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, and he refused her, and she lied about it, then all of a sudden he was put into disfavor. Just like Moses was in disfavor here, Joseph was put in prison. And we know how that story turned out. Joseph ended up saving his people. So let's see what happens to Moses. It says, "But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well." Now, as the scriptures later reveal to us, it appears that at this point in time, Moses was about 40 years old. We don't know a whole lot about those years growing up, except that we knew he grew up in the palace with the Pharaoh, with the king, as the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. But now his life has changed. Now he's a fugitive. He's a refugee from Egypt and has gone to this land to the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well there. And here's what we're told: that at that well he met a woman named Zipporah. Her dad was Jethro. He was some kind of a priest, Jethro. It says, "Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses as a wife. And she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, 'I am a stranger in a foreign land.'" So while he's there, he gets married, has a child, Gershom. He's tending the flocks, helping his father-in-law, and he's just minding his own business. But things are about to change. We're about to go into the next phase of his life. We know that he spends about 40 years there, 40 years in the land of Midian. So probably by the time this next set of circumstances happens, his child is probably grown also at this point in time, or nearly grown. So here's what we're told. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So there's about to be a change in Moses' life. There's about to be a change for the children of Israel who are in slavery at Egypt. This is a big point in time in the history of the Jewish nation. So we're told this in Exodus 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him as a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked and saw that the bush was burning, but it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, he called to him and said, Moses, Moses? He said, Here I am. And the Lord said, Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at the Lord. And the Lord said, I have surely heard the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and I've heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. And then once again, he's saying, I'm going to take them back to that promised land, to that land that I promised all generations ago, Abraham and his lineage. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Well, of course, Moses wanted to be convinced that he needed to do this, and God had some signs. He told him to take his rod and throw it on the ground, and he did. And it became a serpent. Moses was scared, jumped back, and the Lord said, hold it by its tail, and he did, and it turned back into a rod. Another sign he gave him, he said, stick your arm into your bosom, and he did. Pulled it out, and it was leprous. It was white as snow. He said, put it back in. He did the second time. It came back out. It was clean. It was well. He was healed. So after this, Moses still is resisting. Even though he knows this is God, he doesn't want to go. Please, Lord, don't make me go. There's surely somebody else better than me that can do this. Yeah, here I am. I'm 80 years old. What am I going to do, Lord? He says, I've got it. He says, Lord, I'm not very much at speaking. I just, when I get in a crowd of people, I don't know what to say. And I just have a real hard time with that. And God said, is not Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and look, he is also coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. Now you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you what you shall do. So he shall be your spokesman to the people, and he himself shall be a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God. And you shall take this rod in your hand, which with you shall do the signs. So God had an answer for all of Moses' excuses. Finally, the last one, he couldn't speak. He said, I'm going to send your brother Abraham with you. Your brother Aaron with you. Aaron is a priest of the tribe of Levi. He said, he can speak well. He'll speak for you. So we're told that Moses went down to Egypt. It says, Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father, and father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go and return to my brethren who are in Egypt and see whether they're still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. So he tells the father-in-law, I need to go back to Egypt and check on my family. I've been gone 40 years. May I go? And he says, yes, you can go, and you can take Zipporah, your wife, and you can take Gershom, your son. And he said, the Lord said, go to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead. Then Moses took his wife and his sons and set them on a donkey, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. So the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of his land. Then Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord commanded them, so they did. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. Think about that. 80-year-old man. He spent 40 years out in the wilderness with his wife and child and father-in-law, tending the flocks. He's been long gone from Egypt and all the luxuries of the palace that he had when he was there. But here he is, and God has called on him. He is the one that has been chosen to save God's people from Egyptian bondage. Think about that little child. Think about the plan that went into place when Jochebed took her little baby boy and put him in that ark made of bulrushes. This was all a part of God's plan. 80 years earlier this happened. 80 years earlier, but here it's coming to fruition. We're finding out why God did not allow this little Hebrew boy to be killed. Why he wasn't allowed to be thrown into the river. Instead, he was put in a little ark and saved by the Pharaoh's daughter. As always, God has a plan, and this is proof of God's plan. Next week, we're going to talk about, next time we meet, we're going to talk about the Egyptian bondage and how Moses delivered the children of Israel. You all are familiar with the story of the 10 plagues and then the wandering in the wilderness and the law of Moses being instituted. But that's all we're going to cover today. We're just talking today about Moses' first 80 years. So just think about what it would be like to be 80 years old and called on to lead your people as Moses was. No wonder he was apprehensive about it. But he knew he had God with him, and with God's help, he was able to do what he needed to do. Let's go to our Father in prayer. Dear God, we come before thee, we praise your name. We thank you so much for the plan that you've had for us since the beginning of time. We thank you for the plan that you had with Moses and through his life, and then later through the law of Moses, and then later through the atonement of Jesus as a sacrifice for our sins. Thank you for being our God, dear Lord, and please help us as we continue to struggle with this pandemic. Help us to remain healthy, dear Lord, and help us to soon have a vaccine to help avoid this deadly plague. Thank you for being our God. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Stay safe.